Hi, welcome to Julie B Deep Dives channel. I'm Julie B, and today I am so excited that I have the amazing Doug Hughes, aka the Man in Yellow from MGM's From here. Doug, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview.
My pleasure, Julie. Happy to be here.
Oh, it's really a thrill to get to do this. So, I mean, because I found the show late, but I made up for lost time. I found the show just a little under a year. I think actually, no, yeah, a little under a year ago. And I just went right down the rabbit hole. I think it's one of the best shows I've ever seen. I think From is just on another level to what anything else um any other show has to offer, just in terms of just being the whole package. I mean, it's got a little of everything. It's got really deep character moments. Um, it's got horror, it's got suspense, it's got mystery, it has comedy. It actually has comedy in it too. There's quite a bit. I mean, sometimes it's a little dark humor, but it's laugh out loud at times.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I just think more than anything else, it's a masterpiece, and I think you fit right in. You're going to be an amazing addition to the show. But just to start off, just to give the viewers a little background, I'm curious, like, where did you grow up? Could you give a little background on your early life and how you got interested in theater?
Sure. It's always tricky to talk about this, though, and I'll get to that. But I grew up in what was a small town just north of Toronto, a place called Richmond Hill. When I was a kid, Richmond Hill was a town of 10,000 people. It's now over 200,000. It's grown a lot since I was a kid. I was the fourth of six boys. My dad ran the local Shell station. Mom was a full-time housewife, as you can guess. And when I was a kid, I had three preoccupations: hockey, dinosaurs, and performing. And that's the thing that's kind of tricky to explain, because I didn't start performing at a very, very young age. But when the concept of being a performer first occurred to me as a young kid, I think I always just assumed that I was going to end up doing that, No idea why. There was no tradition in my family of that whatsoever. I come from a pretty blue collar background, but yeah, it was just something that I think I assumed I would do. I mean, I remember when the very first opportunity came to do a play in my grade school, I just assumed I was going to be in it, which was kind of funny because it was an operetta. And when I was a kid, I had a voice like Mom's Mabley. I couldn't sing to save my life. So I didn't sing in the operetta. They actually used me as a dancer, but it was like, you're doing a show? Well, of course I'm going to be in it. No idea where that came from. I mean, the dinosaur thing and the hockey thing, I completely understand where those came from. But the performer thing, I don't know. It's just this weird thing that as I say, once that concept occurred to me, it's like, well, yeah, of course I'm going to do that.
Right, right. That's amazing. Yeah, that seems like a true calling. Then, when you start that young with a fixation like that, it's a calling. It's definitely something that you were meant to be doing. Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me.
Well,
Just
and the
comes
very
natural.
first way it manifested itself was my parents had a lot of Alan Sherman records, and you're probably too young to know who Alan Sherman is, but he was kind of like their generation's Weird Al Yankovic. He did send-ups of popular songs, and he was Jewish, so there's a lot of Jewish humor in his stuff as well, which of course went right over my head, but I knew it was funny even if I didn't get the jokes, right? And I think
Yeah.
I memorized every single song on all of the Alan Sherman albums that my parents had. And when I was in the third grade, I remember going up to the principal of our school and suggesting that perhaps one day we could have an assembly in the gym where I could treat the school to a selection of Alan Sherman tunes. And he says, he was great. He says, okay, Doug, I tell you what, you go and get the band organized and get it all set up. And once you get everything nailed down, you come and see me and we'll set it up. I said, okay. And of course,
Yeah.
it never happened.
That's awesome. But that's a calling, that's a passion. It starts that young. It's kind of in your veins. It's a part of you, clearly. And, it's not, it sounds like, a lot of kids that get into acting get into it more because of their parents. But with you, it sounds like it came from you. It wasn't something where you have stage parents trying to get you into this situation.
No, and the thought of trying to do it professionally as a kid, frankly, never occurred to me. I mean, I always got involved in theater at school whenever the opportunity came up. And I knew before I started high school that this is what I was going to do for a living. I mean, when I was younger, I really wanted to make hockey a career. And that was a serious concern. But by the time I was getting close to high school, it was really at the level I was playing at. I was doing a lot of traveling and it was starting to impinge on my schoolwork. And I was very concerned about that. And I saw high school as being like 9 hours of homework every night, so I was terrified of the two things conflicting. And it was also a very expensive sport. I was a goalie, which is the most expensive position to be in because it's all that equipment,
Yeah.
And my parents couldn't really afford to keep me in it anyway. So my dad told me before I went into high school, he said, I think it's time to call it quits. And I didn't put up a fight because, as I say, I was worried about school. So that was that. But all the way through high school, I knew that I was going to study theater as soon as I got out and hopefully have a career as an actor.
That's terrific. Yeah. I mean, I know it must have been difficult, you know, trying to break into that. I mean, it's one of those things where you've got to really be so passionate and committed to this, because for most people it seems like an impossible dream, to actually make a career out of acting. But if you have a passion for it, then you're gonna just keep pushing through whatever obstacles you have to. You know, I know, from other interviews, I know a little bit about how you got to get a gig at the Shaw Festival, and it sounds like that was really a turning point for you in your career. When did that happen? And it sounds like it was just in time too. Like, just when you're starting to lose hope and ready to give up, like this came together for
I
you. When
I
was that?
literally I had literally circled the day on the calendar that I was going to give up my career. And 8 days
Yeah.
before that date arrived, I got the phone call that I was getting a season at the Shaw Festival. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but I ended up being there for 13 seasons. So, yeah, it had a profound effect on my life. Not just because of the job itself, but also the work that I got to do while I was there and the people I got to work with. It was truly a life-changing event when that happened.
How
Had it
long
not
were you
happened, I have no
struggling?
idea what I'd be doing right now.
How long were you struggling before that happened for you? Like, what year was that when that
I,
happened? When you
I
got the gig?
first auditioned for the Shaw Festival, I think it would have been the fall of 1978 or 1979. I was
Wow.
hired for the 1995 season.
Wow.
So it took approximately 15 years of trying. And over those 15 years, I probably auditioned for them about 9 or 10 times. So,
Oh my gosh.
and I mean, I won't do the
That's
whole story,
great.
but the one part that sort of connects with this is, every year I would go in and I do these auditions, and Christopher Newton, who was the artistic director, he would always say the same thing. You do your pieces, and he'd say, "Do you have any questions?" And I'd say no, and he'd say, "All right," and that would be that. But then when I got to my penultimate audition, he asked that question, and I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, I've got a question. Why am I here?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, geez, Chris, the last 15 years, I probably auditioned for you 9 or 10 different times. I figured if you liked me, you would have hired me by now. But if you didn't like me, you wouldn't keep bringing me in. So what am I doing here?" And he said, "It's a very good question." And then he went on about how, every year he goes across the country and he has hundreds of auditions with actors. He sees like 600 people every year. And in any given year, he might have somewhere between a half dozen and a dozen roles to offer people. So the vast majority of those people are out of luck. And he said, amongst
Right.
those people, there are a lot of people whose work he really likes and he likes to keep tabs on them. And he said, "And that's why you're here." Now, had he not said that to me, the following year, which turned out to be my very last audition, I probably wouldn't have asked for an audition. I just would have sent a resume and said, keep me in mind. But I thought, no. He says he wants to keep seeing me. I'll take him at his word. And I went in that one last time. And sure enough, that was the one where I got in the place. So.
That's persistence for you. You kept on going back again and again. That's amazing. Yeah.
Well, and it wasn't the only place. I mean, I was auditioning for lots of other theater companies like that at the same time, not as many times as him, because he was so willing to keep bringing me in. I mean, most theater companies, once they see you, that their general policy is they're not going to see you for the next couple of years because they just saw you last year. They don't need to keep seeing you like that. But Chris was very conscientious about keeping in touch with the people that he was interested in. I never really understood that until he spelled it out for me, but that was the case, which is why I saw him as many times as I did over those years.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it seemed like things just had to align in just the right way for that to come together. And I know you did some pretty like random things. You mentioned before in an interview that you did a lot of commercials in the 80s, and I'm sure like whatever you could get, that's what you take when you're a struggling actor.
Oh yeah,
you gotta do what you gotta do.
When I was starting out, it was made very clear to me right from theater school that it's like, okay, kid, you're not going to be a leading man. So if you had any illusions to that effect, get over it. It's not going to happen, So that means, okay, I'm a character actor. Well, they don't write a lot of character roles for young actors in their 20s. That just doesn't happen. And so work it's a bit of a double whammy. It makes it really difficult for you to get work as a young character actor because there just isn't that much you could do. I did a lot of school tours when I was a kid. I saw more of the Canadian prairies than I thought I would ever see in my life, just touring all over the place in minivans, doing shows for grade school kids. That was kind of the bulk of and small regional theaters and summer theaters and stuff like that. That was the bulk of my early experience in the business.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, performing for kids. It's work. That sounds like fun. Honestly, you get to travel too.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've got to see so much more of this country than I would have ever seen otherwise. And
yeah.
And kids are a great audience. I got to tell you, doing school tours is actually great training as an actor because it teaches you so many good lessons. Like, number one, how to come to terms with bad writing, because a lot of the kids' theater out there is not particularly well written, and so you have to learn how to overcome that as an actor. How to do long runs of the same show day after day after day. How to get along with a tight-knit group of people when you're stuck in a van together day after day and traveling hundreds of miles around. I mean, lots of lessons that stand you in very good stead in your career. How to keep a show fresh, how to keep it interesting, how to make it new every time you have to do it, no matter how many times you've done it in the last 6 months. That was all stuff that really came in handy down the road,
Right. Absolutely. Like all of that sounds like great experience. And then you mentioned, I've heard from other interviews that at the Shaw Festival you did such a wide variety of things too. That must have been an amazing experience to do all different genres so that you could be that versatile. I mean, not many actors can do such a variety, comedy, drama, and now you're going to be in a horror series. And I know you don't have a lot of experience with horror, but I mean, having to be adaptable like that, that must have been a huge asset to you, and it's going to continue to be.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite things about being at Shaw. I mean, they even started putting me in the musicals, and that was a story in and of itself, because I did not consider myself a musical performer at all. I mean, we had a modicum of musical training in theater school, but most people who want to do musical theater as a career start as kids, like any musical discipline. You've got to train for years to do that properly. So I never seriously considered. I certainly wasn't a dancer. I could carry a tune. I had a decent voice, but I didn't consider myself a serious singer. I hadn't had enough training. And then, as luck would have it, I got cast in a musical when I was about 25. And I literally thought that it was a clerical error, that they were reading from the wrong list of names when they called to offer me the job. But that was the show where I met my future writing partner. We didn't know at the time we were going to be writing plays together, but she was an actress, and we met doing a production of South Pacific together. And her husband to be, which she also didn't know, was the director of the show. So
Yeah.
so we go back a long way. But yeah, I did that musical, and then a couple of years later, her husband hired me for another musical, Sound of Music, but it was in a non-singing role, a non-musical role. So I thought, oh, clearly they've learned their lesson. I didn't do another musical for almost 20 years, and it was at the Shaw Festival where the musical director there just walked up to me one day and said, "So what are you doing tomorrow afternoon?" Which was a Saturday, and I said, "Nothing. I don't have a matinee." And I said, "Why?" He said, "I want to try something. I want you to sing for me." And I said, "For what? A wedding? A bar mitzvah? What?" And he said, No, for the musical next year, which was a production of The Mystery of Edwin Drood. And I said, "Seriously?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "There's three parts. I want to run you through a bit of the music just to see where it sits in your voice." I said, "Okay." So the next day we met in the bar in the theater, and he sat at the piano and plunked this stuff out for me, and I sang it. And he said, "Okay, I just want to make sure this was in your range." I said, "You're seriously considering putting me in the musical next year?" And he said, "Yeah." I went, "All right. You're the guy with the PhD in music. I guess you know what you're doing." And didn't they put me in the musical that next year? And I was terrified, just like I was doing South Pacific the very first time. I just felt completely out of my depth, that I had no right to be there at all, and proceeded to have the time of my life, And then after that, they started putting me in musicals on a semi-regular basis. And so suddenly, after all these years, I find myself auditioning for the big musicals in Toronto, And I remember the first time I went in, they were doing a production of The Producers. And I got called in to sing for one of the roles in that. And the people who cast these big musicals, it's generally the same casting people all the time. They're looking at my resume and they're like, "Why have we never seen you before? You're like 45 years old." I just said, "It's a long story," and left it at that. But yeah, that was Shaw that really gave me that opportunity, that led to all kinds of interesting stuff that I never would have had the opportunity to do otherwise,
That's amazing. Yeah. Like that it could open doors for you and train you in so many different genres and styles. I was actually that was gonna be the question I asked. Had you ever done a musical? That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. That's so cool. And yeah, I know, not having a whole lot of experience with horror, some people might find that like daunting, but in your case, you've done such a variety of things that, I, I, I mean, you already embodied the role so perfectly. You just kind of maximize. I've never seen anybody maximize such a tiny bit of screen time for maximum effect, just like that. Like
Well,
completely owned the scene. The presence that you had was electrifying. It was just amazing.
well, my standard response to that is this. About 90% of that work was done for me before I even got on set. I mean, a tremendous amount of that has to do with how carefully constructed the season had been to bring us to that point, so that scene could have the effect that it could. And also, thanks to the quality of John's writing, John Griffin, he was able to encapsulate in that very brief scene a really fully realized three-dimensional character. I mean, when I was sent the scene to audition, I read it and I just went, you'd have to be an idiot not to understand what this scene is about. I mean, it was so clear, and to be able to write with that kind of economy, to establish that much stuff in such a short period of time is a tremendous skill. And I take my hat off to him, because as a writer myself, I can appreciate how difficult it is to accomplish that, but not just John's contribution. I mean, just the whole series itself, and the makeup and the hair and the fight choreography and all of that stuff, which I had nothing directly to do with, So in a sense, it's kind of like, just show up and get the lines right and don't bump into the furniture and you'll be fine,
Right. I mean, I yeah, I can see that. John Griffin is an amazing writer for sure. But yeah, I mean, it just seems like fate kind of landed you in the right place at the right time, because I know that you had auditioned for From before, and it just maybe wasn't the right time. This was the role that was waiting for you. This was the time, and the fact that it came. It's not even like you were trying to get another audition. I know it just kind of happened. It was like the planets aligned, and and
Well,
and it's cool how that worked.
here's the thing that I took away from that experience, because when I first auditioned, it was before the first season, and they had me read for one role, and then I got called back for it. And when I got that very first scene, I remember seeing an interview with Scott McCord, and he was talking about his very first audition and how when he read the scene that he had to do, he was so overcome by the quality of the writing. And that was exactly my experience with my first audition. I went, who's the genius who wrote this stuff? I would kill to be in this, you know? And I was called back for that role, didn't get it. They came back and said, okay, we're going to go in another direction with that one. We would like you to read this other role. So then they had me read another one. And I can't remember it. I think I was called back for that one as well. Didn't get either of them. And then I thought, oh, well, I guess that's it. Then I don't hear from them for 3 years. And it never occurred to me that, they might have kept me on the back burner somewhere to bring me back to read for something else. And even when I got the audition, I didn't know at first that it was for From. I got a call from my agent just saying someone's doing an availability check. They want to make sure you're available for the next month. And I'm like, are you kidding? I'm available for the rest of my life. And then, and then we were almost at the end of that month when I hadn't heard anything. And I thought, okay, I guess they cast it, whatever it was. So I called my agent because I had an opportunity to do a day's work on something else, but it was still within this period when I was supposed to be free. And she said, no, you're still being considered for this thing. And originally, all they had asked for was our audition reels, and they were going to cast from that. But then apparently the thinking was, well, they were doing this because it was such a small role. And they thought, well, we don't want to call people in to audition for it. I think they were concerned that we would think it was beneath us. I certainly wouldn't have had a problem with that. I read for parts like this all the time, so it was like, whatever. But because of the fact that this character was going to have a future, or at least that was the intention, they finally decided, no, we need to do auditions with people. So I had, and it was at this point when they told me you've got a Zoom audition that I found out that it was for From. And that's when I got nervous, because I thought, I can't mess this up. This is strike three. I got to get this one right. And because it was such a short scene, it was an incredibly short audition. I mean, I don't think Jack and I were on Zoom together for longer than 5 minutes. I mean, we did 2 takes of the scene. We did it once. He said, okay, gave me a few tweaks to do it again. He said, thanks a lot. And that was that,
Right.
And then it was late that night. That was a Saturday night. It was very late that night that my agent called me to tell me that I had been booked. And I just thought, it was like somebody calling to tell me I'd won the lottery. It's like, I'm going to be on From. I can't believe it. This is awesome. And the first thing Monday morning, I was on a flight to Halifax, And the other thing is, at that point, I had never seen an episode of the series because I didn't have Paramount Plus. I didn't have the streaming service to see it on. So as interested as I was in it, I had never actually had an opportunity to see it. So I quickly signed up for Paramount Plus, and I managed to watch 4 episodes in the time between being cast and actually shooting. And that's all I had under my belt when we shot that scene. Didn't know anything about the 3rd season at all, aside from the script for that episode. So
just flying blind, and yeah, it's like fate came together for you. And ironically, yeah, I mean, fate is a huge theme on the show too. With the theme of reincarnation happening, Tabitha and Jade were fated to come back over and over again. And now, ironically, here you are playing the man in yellow. And it sounded so much like fate brought you back to this show when it was time. I mean, how uncanny is it that you were offered an audition for the very show you wanted to be a part of from the beginning? It was like, I mean, serendipity, right place at the right time. The show kind of found you when it was ready for you and the ideal role. came through, and now it is ironic when you think about it, because you were auditioning to play the role of characters who are trapped, and now here you are sauntering in looking like a supervillain puppeteer who's pulling the strings. Like maybe even the big bad. Who knows? I know you don't know anything about what his role is going to be yet, but how does it feel to find yourself in a role that could potentially be a major villain, maybe even the big bad, who knows, in season 4 through the end of the series?
The closest thing I can compare this to is the Shaw Festival story. Not that I was on the verge of quitting right now, because I'm not. I mean, since COVID and since becoming officially a senior citizen, I have to say that things have slowed down considerably. But my writing partner and I are still writing together, and she directs when she isn't writing, and we're still pursuing those things. But in a really diminished sort of way, shall we say. And so for this to come along when it did, and so unexpectedly, and to be such a big deal, it's overwhelming in a sense. And it didn't really occur to me until well after the fact that, so they've been sort of, that first round of auditions actually had more of an effect, I guess, than I realized. I mean, I knew they liked me. They don't call you back if they don't like you, But the fact that I didn't get anything, I just sort of thought, okay, well, that's that. It's game over, And then when this happened, I think it was weeks after we shot the episode that I sort of thought, so yeah, the reason I got called in for this was because they were sort of probably keeping an eye out for something that they thought I might be right for. And here it is,
That's it.
I guess,
Yeah.
I mean, that's conjecture, but I think that's a pretty likely scenario,
That sounds like it, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, and Jack Bender, who painted the Man in Yellow, yeah, maybe he even already had you in mind when he painted that, because it does look a bit like you. He's got brown hair, but there's a resemblance.
Oh yeah. Well, I've said this in a few interviews. I mean, on the day, I think it was after we had finished shooting, or quite late in the shooting process anyway, he got out his phone and he showed me that image and told me that he had done it, and I didn't realize that he'd had anything to do with the making of the images. He doesn't do them all, but he has done several of them apparently. And he showed me that one and he said, "What do you think?" And I looked at it and I said, "Well, you got the ears right."
Yes.
In fact, I have a story about that. I don't know if I told you about this yet, but there's a woman who's she's on one of the fan groups on Facebook who crochets little dolls. Did I tell you this story?
No, but I know about the fan groups. I know you've been joining them. That's awesome. Go ahead.
And she makes these little dolls of From characters, and apparently Hannah Cherami's mother got a hold of her and asked her if she could make one of Hannah, of Julie. She wanted to give it to her as a Christmas present, and so she posted a picture of it on this group. And I looked at it and I sent her a message. I said, "Can you do one of the Man in Yellow?" And she said, "Yeah, totally." So she did one up for me. And she sent me a picture of it, and I'll see if I can do this justice on my little webcam here. I'll call it up for you to show it to you.
Nice.
Here it is.
Oh, oh my gosh. Yes, I see it.
And when she first showed it to me, it didn't have the ears on it. And I just looked at it. I said, "Oh, that's awesome." And I showed it to my writing partner because we were working together by Zoom. And she looked at it and she said, "Where are the ears?" I said to this woman, Alexis, I said, "My writing partner is asking where the ears are." She said, "I'll sew a couple on." So she did. So here he is.
There you go. That's terrific. I love it. I love that you're joining these fan groups online. That's so fun. Like, yeah, I'm sure people get excited when they see you commenting on things, or
And that's been a real adjustment for me too. I have never in my life, with the exception of doing school tours, because when you do shows for school kids, they get real excited, but aside from that kind of very youthful enthusiasm, I'm not used to people going, "Oh my God, he responded to my message." It's like, what the hell is that? But I've had a lot of those kinds of experiences, and for me, it's been a lot of fun. One guy sent me a message on Instagram. This was back in, I think, early December, and he said, "I hate to ask this of you. I know it's a real imposition, and if it's too much, just tell me." He said, "But it's my wife's birthday. Is there any possibility that you could just record a message saying happy birthday to her?" And I said, "I'll go you one better." And I said, "What's her name?" And he told me her name. Can't remember what it was now. And I got out my saxophone and I played "Happy Birthday to You" on my saxophone. And then I said "Happy Birthday" to him. And I sent him that. And they went out of their minds. He's like, "Oh my God, she's crying. She's so happy." And I'm like, it was a stupid little thing. I usually record a version of "Happy to Birthday to You" that I use on Facebook that I send to my friends when it's their birthday, So, I mean, this was like a nothing thing for me to do, right? But these people were like so over the moon about it. And I was just like, I was not prepared for that kind of response from people, It's
That's amazing.
terra incognita for me,
I bet, like when you did your first round of interviews, you were just kind of plunged into all this. Suddenly, this was like right around the finale, and now you've had a little more time to experience it. And I mean, it must be quite a whirlwind for you to see what a rabid, crazy fandom this show has, and how excited they are. Yeah, we do get excited. If somebody responds to a message, it is like, oh my God. So.
Well, I will tell you a funny story. Many years ago now, I guess it was about 2015. I was doing the dishes one night in my kitchen, listening to the evening news on the radio, and there was some news item about some celebrity who had been behaving badly. I can't think who it was now, and I found myself thinking about something that I've thought about many, many times over the course of my career, and that is that the central irony of being largely a stage actor, at least in Canada, is I have spent my entire career in this very public pursuit and doing it with complete and utter anonymity, And I mean, as I said, I've thought about this many, many times over the years, but suddenly I had a new thought. I thought, oh my God, when you think about it, we would make the perfect spy, because number one, actors are comfortable with improvising. They're comfortable with taking on different roles, dealing with unfamiliar situations. They get access to parts of, to things that the general public often doesn't get access to from time to time. And let's face it, who would ever suspect a theater actor of being a spy? And so I got this idea for a novel that's about this guy named Harry, who is a young actor, and he gets recruited to work for CSIS, which is the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, working for them as a field agent. And how at first he thinks it's, this is like the day job from heaven, because they're going to pay him whether he's working or not. They're going to make sure it doesn't interfere with his theater career, blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, he gets into the reality of doing the job and finds out it's the precise opposite. But the whole notion of that came from the fact that I've been able to walk down the street and not get recognized for my entire career, except for that brief period when I was doing all those commercials in the 80s. And I did get a brief taste of what that was like back then, but it was more of an annoyance than anything. But this kind of response, it's just totally alien to me, and I've been doing this for a very long time. So it's kind of strange to stumble into this predicament at this late stage in my career.
It's so cool. I mean, I think I speak for the whole fandom when I express just appreciation that you're willing to interact with the fans and do something sweet like play the saxophone and for a happy birthday message. That's awesome. And you may have the time to do it, but that doesn't mean you have to spend your time that way. And
no,
fans, that means a lot.
Many other things I probably should be doing with my time that I'm not. But it's fun. I mean, I'm having a good time with this stuff. I mean, the fan groups on Facebook, I just went on there largely to take the piss out of people. I'm usually just cracking jokes on there, but that's kind of my want. So yeah, it's a fun pastime for me,
That's terrific. That's terrific. Just to circle back to something about about the whole Man in Yellow villain thing. Whenever we think about the origin, I mean, when you think about the origin story of a villain, if it's high quality writing, then there's always a reason why he or she turned down that path. Like there always has to be a reason if it's well written, and that humanizes the villain. And given the high caliber of writing on From, I believe this is going to be the avenue they're going to take. I doubt we're going to see some kind of two-dimensional cartoonish villain. That's not John Griffin's style.
No,
And
indeed. Indeed.
so I loved that quote that you have shared in other interviews from Mary Shelley for that reason about how monsters are created, because I really think that is what's going on here. That's what we're going to find out related to the Man in Yellow's backstory.
And the reason that quote, I wish I could remember how I ended up stumbling on that quote, because it was about a week after I did my first interview. And I was asked in that interview, basically, what was your take on the character? And because in terms of how I interpreted it, I was largely left to my own devices. Now, here's something that I think I need to explain about the TV and film industry, and that is that when you're hired as a day player, somebody who's just there for one day to do one scene, you are in general kind of left to your own devices. I mean, you've auditioned for the role, you know what they have in mind from what happened in the audition process, but in general, there's not a whole lot of direction that goes on. You're kind of on your own as far as that stuff goes. It's a little different here because of the fact that this is a character that presumably we're going to be seeing more of. But on the day, it was really no different than any of my other experiences, just showing up to do a small part, And so it wasn't surprising to me at all that I was kind of left largely on my own. I mean, Jack certainly directed the scene when we were shooting it. But in terms of what I did with the character, I chatted with John Griffin before we started shooting. We didn't really talk about that. We talked about writing and that kind of stuff, but we didn't get into, the stuff about the character. And frankly, at the time, it didn't really occur to me. I was sort of in day player mode. It was like, okay, I know how this works. I know what I'm going to do here. I've made my decisions on how I'm going to do this stuff, So it wasn't really an issue. But now that it looks like there's going to be a lot more to this, I'm very interested in talking to John just to get some idea of how he sees the background of this character. I mean, I caught that interview he did where he told the story about the Man in Yellow that he saw in the streets of LA. And I found that fascinating, that he saw this guy, and the first time he saw him, it was this, this beautiful kind of poetic vision. And the next time he saw him, however many years later it was kind of like a nightmare version of the same guy. And I think his point was, he was left wondering what happened to this guy? How did he get there? And that's sort of how I approached the scene. It's like, okay, I don't really know who this guy is. I don't even know what sort of being he is specifically. I mean, obviously he's supernatural. He seems to be a guy who's, fairly high up the food chain as far as I can discern from the script. But beyond that, I don't really have anything to go on. But the one thing that I could hang my hat on was, you don't get to be this type of character without having suffered a lot of damage along the way. And that was kind of the hook for me for the role. That's what I was sitting with when the camera started to roll,
Right. And I think you nailed it based on his story about that man on the street in the suit. I think that, yeah, the Man in Yellow is going to end up being some being who was whose heart was once pure but is now corrupted.
Yeah.
As Mary Shelley said,
Yeah.
monsters are not born; they are made. So yeah, I think you were spot on in your instincts, even with so little to go on with the script. And I think people should not be discouraged that the inspiration came from something like this and not, say, The King in Yellow per se. Who knows what other influences it could have on it, but I just loved that story. And it does suggest that there's going to be magic involved. John said that it looked like he had been on a magical quest and failed, this man on the street. So
Yeah.
there's definitely going to be a mystical element to it. This isn't just going to be a regular guy. Clearly, a regular guy doesn't have the strength to rip a person's throat out with his bare hands.
No. I mean, and again, even from the brief scene in the season finale, that much was pretty clear, if only implicit, but that certainly seemed to be the case. And when I stumbled on that Mary Shelley quote, I mean, it really resonated with me, because I thought, yes, that's exactly what was going through my head. I mean, I wouldn't have articulated it as well as she did, but that's kind of what was going through my head when we shot it. So yeah. But I would be very interested to hear what John's other thoughts are. With regard to all of the other possible source material that people have been floating out there, it's entirely possible that some of that stuff is true, that John has read some of that stuff. I have no idea, but even if he has, I think a lot of the theories that I've seen seem to be drawing direct connections between things like the King in Yellow and the Man in the Yellow Suit. And I think that betrays a certain misunderstanding of the writing process, because you generally don't draw straight lines between a source like that and your own character. It's more elliptical than that, I can't remember if you're the one I told this story to, but my writing partner and I had some experience with this. Our second play was a murder mystery, and we were writing it in the style of an Agatha Christie mystery, We weren't patterning it after any of her plays at all. We had no specific idea in mind as far as, her plots had nothing to do with that. We had our own idea about what was going on, but we just wanted it to have that sort of Agatha Christie feel. So we had been working on it for about a year when she called me up one day and she said, this was the year before I went to the Shaw Festival. And ironically, they were doing a production of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None at the Shaw Festival. And she said to me, we should go down and check it out, because, just to get a sense of that Agatha Christie thing. And I said, yeah, absolutely. So we went down on a Sunday afternoon. I booked tickets over the phone, and we got there, and the booking people had made a mistake, because I'd asked for 2 tickets for the matinee and they had sold us 2 tickets for the evening show. So when we went to get our tickets, it's like, no, we booked for the matinee. And they said, well, unfortunately, the matinee is sold out, which turned out to be a good thing, because what they did was they put us in the latecomers booth, which meant that there was a glass partition between us and the rest of the audience, which was fortunate, because about 5 minutes into the play, the 2 of us were going, oh my God, we stole Agatha Christie's play! And we had no idea. We had never seen this play. We had never read it, But here we were. We were writing this story about, it all takes place on an island in the middle of a lake, which is exactly the case with And Then There Were None. It's this group of people who've been gathered together for an event, not the same event, but still there they are. There's a power failure. They all receive these threatening letters. There's a scene where, everything's happening by candlelight because the power's out. And then people start getting killed off one by one, all of which is in our play. And so by the end of And Then There Were None, we were just shattered. We thought, what the hell are we going to do? We're never going to be able to do this play without people being convinced that we ripped it off of Agatha Christie, which was not the case at all. So we went across the street to this Italian restaurant, ordered a bottle of wine, sat down and went, all right, what the hell are we going to do? And I said, well, we're not trashing a year's worth of work. I'm sorry. We put too much time into this. We got to find another way around it. So we talked about it, and I said, I know what we do. We acknowledge the similarities. We do it openly, Our play is about a group of people that gather every Halloween to play these murder mystery games. So we called them the Mousetrap Society. And they have a poster of Agatha Christie that they toast at the end of their murder mystery game, which is something they do every year. And when they toast her, a plot point happens. There's another bit where somebody is looking for something to read, and they pull a copy of And Then There Were None off a bookshelf, and suddenly a secret compartment opens. And I thought, okay, that's enough. That's enough of a nod to Agatha Christie. Now, a lot of people, ironically enough, no one ever accused us of plagiarism or saying, oh, this is so Agatha Christie. If they did, it was always in a positive sort of way. It's like, yeah, they really nailed the genre. They would talk about Agatha Christie in that way. But we were never accused of having ripped off Agatha Christie at all. So I guess we were kind of wasting our time being worried about that. But I look at the way that the From crowd is responding to these various allusions to the Man in Yellow and other things, and trying to draw these direct connections. And I want to say to them, no, it doesn't work that way. If they saw our play, they would probably, and they had read their Agatha Christie, they'd probably think, oh, this is where they got this from. And it's no, that's not the case at all. It's quite the other way around. I mean, were
Hmm.
we influenced by Agatha Christie? Sure, by the style of her other plays. Yeah, absolutely. We understood the genre, but there was no direct connection to these things that appeared to have a direct connection at all. And I would
Right.
say that if you got a chance to ask John Griffin about these various sources, he might say, yeah, I've read a few of those, but how that stuff connects with the finished product, there's no direct line there. That's not how it works.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there could be multiple influences for
Exactly.
where this character came from. For example, there's a kid's chapter book that literally has a villain named the Man in the Yellow Suit
Yeah.
from Tuck Everlasting,
Yes.
and and eternal life is a theme of
Yeah.
the book. Now, who
Yeah.
knows, man? Maybe he read it. Maybe he took a little bit of inspiration from it, potentially. But who knows? It's probably most likely you know, um, like a fusion of multiple influences and inspirations. And at the end of the day, but he created something unique. I believe. I think it's going to be. It's not going to be based on any one thing. And
And I
and if
would
it
bet
were,
you,
that would be
I,
boring.
I bet you money that, if you threw some of these sources at John, he'd go, Tuck Everlasting? I've never heard
Right.
about it. That's awesome. Wow, that's so similar. How cool. Like I guarantee you that with at least some of these, that
Yep.
would be his response.
Sometimes, yeah,
Um,
it might just be a happy accident, like he says. Like certain things, it wasn't intentional, but it's like you in the Agatha Christie play. So that was part one of my deep dive interview with Doug Hughes, who plays the Man in Yellow on the MGM Plus series From. Be sure to check out part two, in which we delve further into discussion of the nature of the Man in Yellow and his role, the filming of that epic season 3 cliffhanger, Doug's awesome work as a playwright, and much more. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'd love to hear your Man in Yellow theories in the comments. And until next time, keep on deep diving, and let's see what we can uncover together.